Unit 6, Adjustment to Final Account, Session 2, Bad Debts and Provision for Doubtful Debts. At the end of this session, you should be able to distinguish between bad debts and doubtful debts. State how bad debt recovered is treated in the books of account. Distinguish between the accounting treatment for increasing the provision for doubtful debt and decreasing the provision for doubtful debt, and make adjustments relating to doubtful debts. Bad debts. Remember that credit sales results in trade debtors for businesses. And also, when these credit sales are made, we make the following double entries: debit debtors account and credit sales account. Debtors are usually given some period of time before payment is demanded from them. However, for a number of reasons, some debtors do not pay up, even long after when they should have paid. Such a debt is referred to as a bad debt. A bad debt then is the balance on a debtor's account which is considered uncollectible. Note that a debtor is an asset, so when a debt is considered to be bad, such an asset becomes worthless, and therefore it becomes prudent and sensible to remove the bad debt totally from the account. This is done by transferring the bad debt from the debtor's account to the bad debt account by this double entry: debit bad debt account and credit debtors account. Note also that the sales made to the debtor whose debt has become bad is included in the sales transferred to the trading account. It therefore makes a lot of accounting sense to reduce the sales by the extent of the value. In sum, when a debt is found to be bad, eliminate it from the account of the debtor by this double entry: debit bad debt account and credit debtors account. With the balance on the bad debt account, debit profit or loss account and credit bad debts account. Bad debts recovered. Sometimes a debt which has been written off as bad may be recovered. The debtor may decide to settle the account after all, though belated. When this happens, the payment made is called bad debt recovered. Note that the debt was written off earlier, but then in a way it has been recovered. When a bad debt is recovered, reinstate the debtor by debiting the debtor's account and crediting bad debt recovered account. Then, to record the receipt of the money paid, debit the cash or bank account and credit debtor's account with the amount received. The balance on the bad debt recovered account is an income. It's transferred to the profit or loss account by debiting the bad debt recovered account and crediting profit or loss account. Doubtful debts and provision for doubtful debts. As discussed above, some debts may be bad and thus have to be written off. Apart from this, there may also be some of the debts that the business may not be sure whether they are collectible or not. In other words, the collectibility of such debt is doubtful. This means they might be recovered or not recovered. With such debt, one should not treat them as bad debt and write them off because they might be paid after all. The most reasonable thing to do is to recognize the fact that there might be a possible expense if it turns out to be uncollectible. To do so, a provision called the provision for doubtful debt is created. Then the original debt is maintained in the books in case the debtor pays up. A number of issues have to be discussed here. First, the amount of doubtful debt will have to be estimated. Generally, a business may, from past experience, be able to estimate the proportion of debtors which may be doubtful. This proportion is applied to the debtors of the business. Note that in applying this percentage, all bad debts should have been written off. This means that the debtors figure should be reduced by the amount of bad debts. Also, if some debtors are known to be experiencing some financial problems which may affect the collectibility of their debt, then such debtors are included in the doubtful debts estimation. After estimating the amount of doubtful debts, the provision for doubtful debt is created using the estimated doubtful debt as the amount of the provision. The provision is set up from profit. Therefore, the double entry is debit profit or loss account and credit provision for doubtful debt account with the estimated amount of doubtful debt. In the statement of financial position, the debtors figure is reduced by the provision for doubtful debt so as to arrive at the good debts which the business is sure to be collectible. The above is the case when the provision for doubtful debt is being created. However, in subsequent years, the provision may be increased or decreased depending on the amount of debtors. If the provision is to be increased, apply the following steps. Calculate the new provision. It may simply be just multiplying the closing debtors figure by a stated percentage. Next, determine the amount of increase. This is done by finding the difference between the amount of the new provision and the existing provision. Note that in this case, the amount of the new provision will be greater than the existing provision. This difference is what has to be provided for. So with this increase in the provision, debit profit or loss and credit provision for doubtful debt. This is done at the end of the year when the final accounts are being prepared. Then in the statement of financial position, show the provision for doubtful debt, the new provision, as a deduction from the debtors figure on the asset side. If, however, the provision has to be decreased, steps 1 and 4 above will remain the same. However, steps 2 and 3 will change. Determine the amount of decrease. This will be the difference between the amount of the existing provision and the new provision. In this case, the existing provision will be greater than the new provision. This difference, which has been overprovided for and thus is no longer required as a provision, will have to be written back into the profit or loss account. This is achieved by the entry debit provision for doubtful debts and credit profit or loss account. In this session, we distinguish between bad debt and doubtful debt. We stated how bad debt recovered is treated in the books of account and distinguish between the accounting treatment for increasing the provision for doubtful debt and decreasing the provision for doubtful debt, and made adjustments relating to doubtful debt.